Welcome to the Father on Purpose podcast, featuring author and ministry leader Kent Evans and business executive and military veteran Lawson Brown. This is a show for you, Dad. You want to be a godly and intentional father. Unfortunately, you've turned to these two knuckleheads for help. Let us know how that works out for you. Before we begin, remember this: you are not a father on accident. So go be a father on purpose. Please welcome your hosts, Kent and Lawson.
Hey, Dad, you're in for a real treat today on the Father on Purpose podcast because we have, as we occasionally do, a guest with us today. Now, by way of introduction, I got to tell you about this guest a little bit, but it is our former pastor of our church, Dave Stone. Dave, thank you, by the way, for joining us. I am so honored to have this chance to talk to you, as is Lawson. And I've just got to set a little bit of a frame, because I'm not going to point out exactly what your age is. What I am going to say is that April and I were married over 28 years ago. In fact, in a couple of months, we'll celebrate our 29th wedding anniversary. And you officiated our wedding. And at that time, you weren't like 11 when you did the wedding. So, people, we got a sharp group of listeners out there, and they can do the math. So Dave's been around. Dave, however, is part of a film production that is telling a story from back in the 90s, a story I remember, Dave. And so we're thrilled to have you today. And we're going to start with fatherhood, and then we're going to talk about this film called Ordinary Angels. So Dave, thank you a ton for coming. Would you do me a favor and orient our listeners to your family story? How many kids you got? How long have you and Beth been married? Give us the quick kind of Dave Stone thumbnail sketch.
Yeah, it's great to be with you. Thank you so much, and I appreciate everything that you do and the way that both you and Lawson encourage fatherhood and godly fatherhood. First of all, I do want to say I think I've married 544 couples, and whenever I'm asked, hey, what was your favorite wedding? I mean, hands down, it is a no-brainer. I immediately say, oh, Kent and April. 28 and a half years ago, almost 29. So I usually do the math for them, but
you remember every moment.
Yes. You were dressed up that day, as I recall. Sweating in the back room. No, it's great to be with you. I've been married to Beth for 38 years, and we have 3 children, 10 grandchildren, which does officially make me extremely old. And I'll just go ahead and tell people so they can, as they are picturing an elderly man right now, and I'm biting my tongue on some different jokes here. An elderly man who is 62 years old is who you're listening to today. So a wealth of experience and wisdom is what we like to say.
There you go.
Yes, that's wisdom.
Yes,
that's exactly right. Well, let's lean in a little bit, Dave, to your own fatherhood journey. I know your dad, before he passed away, and we've heard stories that you've shared. I met Sam more than once, and was even talked at his church back in the day up in Ohio at one point. Yeah. And what an amazing dad you had. I feel like in some ways on fatherhood, you may have started on first or second base with such a cool dad. Would you agree?
I mean, I'm the most fortunate person in the world because I had a dad who actually lived it out. People ask me, why did you go in the ministry? Well, my father was a pastor, but that sometimes pushes people away from ministry. In my case, it attracted me. It attracted my brother to ministry. And it was because we saw the same man at home as who we saw in the pulpit. And there was a consistency there. And so, yes, I feel extremely fortunate that I had someone who modeled the faith for me in so many different ways, modeled marriage for me. And, our family was in a tragic car accident when I was around 6 years old, and a child in the other car passed away. They hydroplaned on a rainy 2-lane highway and came across and hit us head on. We were both going 55 miles per hour. Back then you had seatbelts in the front seat, but not in the back seat. And my mom suffered a skull fracture. A boy in the other car passed away. And it was a very traumatic next few years for our family. And so two boys at home when your mom has to sleep the entire afternoon in order to be able to make it through the morning or evening,
Wow.
was a recipe for disaster with two rambunctious kids. And so my dad would take one of us with him, and he would divide and conquer. And so we became his sidekicks. And as a result of it, we went on calls to hospitals, to funeral homes. One of us would be there with them when he'd go deliver a new members packet to somebody and talk to them about
Wow.
using their gifts for the Lord. We would be with him when he'd be sharing his faith with someone and talking with someone about becoming a Christian. So we got this upfront, close and personal ministry training and fatherhood training every single day of our life. So very, very blessed, very blessed.
Wow.
Wow.
Dave, I came to faith at Southeast Christian, and you personally, your sermons impacted me greatly as I was learning as a young dad myself at the time. And I think I was around 30 years old, so it was not a childhood experience for me, but it's great to hear your voice. Your voice and seeing your face is one of those things that just immediately brings me back, and just back to my kind of my roots. And I want to tell you, humor has always played a big part in my life. I love laughing, and I didn't know how to be a Christian. I was literally, as a 30-year-old man learning, and I learned from you, and I learned from others at Southeast, and I learned from other men in my life. But you always had such a gift of weaving in funny stories and telling jokes. And I just want to tell you that and ask, how do you connect? So I guess what I'm saying in that too is, I learned that it was okay to laugh. Christianity and faith didn't have to be this heavy duty, stoic experience. And man, I got a lot of that permission from you that it's okay. You take your faith seriously, but don't take yourself seriously. How do you feel like humor is a part of the foundation of who you are, how you preach, to how you see faith, your own faith, how you have developed in others? How does that weave in?
Yeah, I remember years ago when I just joined the staff at Southeast, after I'd been there a couple of years, someone described the church. They were talking about Southeast, and they listened to our radio program on Sunday mornings. And the way they described Southeast was, they said, "Oh, that's the church that loves to laugh." And I thought, wow, what a compliment to a church, because we would have so many people from more traditional backgrounds, a different faith upbringing, that felt guilty or awkward laughing in church. And is this okay? It's one of the reasons why I love the depiction of Jesus by Jonathan Rumi in The Chosen. It's the fact that Jesus laughs, he has fun, he drops one-liners. If you think about it, when you're making a list of qualities that you look for in a friend, one of the first ones is a sense of humor. And why is that? Someone that doesn't take themselves too seriously. So I had a good role model in my dad, but also in Bob Russell in the self-deprecating humor department, and realizing that really sets people at ease, and it allows them to let their defenses down. And when I think that happens, that's when the gospel can come through. But I've always been attracted to humor, and a student of it, and enjoy it. And I think that storytelling is a great way to mix some of those things in, but just in everyday life, just not taking yourself too seriously. I think your coworkers want to be around you if you don't take yourself too seriously. If you're a stick in the mud and it's always got to be like this, and you never smile, it'd be like paying $40 to go hear a comedian and then sitting there with your arms folded and not laughing. I'm like, what's wrong with that dude? Right.
Right.
I keep telling Lawson that if he just hangs out with me long enough, he will develop a sense of humor.
You do keep telling me that. I keep waiting. When's it going to show up, man? When are you going to be funny?
It's not
You can
my
be
fault
corny.
that
You
you're
can be
such a
always be
slow
corny.
study. It is not
Yeah.
my fault that you don't catch on. That is not my responsibility.
Oh,
Not my
Yeah,
problem.
love
Wait
it.
a minute.
Dave,
Dave's here.
help me out.
We don't got to air this out. Dave's here. Let's just stay
okay.
focused, Lawson.
We'll
Stay
pick
focused.
this up out when we're off the air, gentlemen, and we'll get some counselors and some therapy heading to both your all's direction.
Clearly. Can you tell us about a lot of dads listen to the show, Dave, who tell us that they're struggling to be, and I want to talk about the dad as depicted in the movie Ordinary Angels. So maybe we can kind of bridge that direction in your answer. But a lot of dads who listen to this show would tell us that they feel overwhelmed, that they feel like they are not doing a good job. They would self-identify as failures, even though I don't think that's accurate. I think they would say that they struggle with communication. Like there's some basics, but I would say in general, most dads feel exhausted, ill-equipped, and they feel like they're not the right man for the job. I think there's a lot of dads who are nodding right now as I describe that, because that's what they tell us on their surveys and in their emails and when they text us. That's what we hear. What would you say to a dad who's walking through that season? Because you and Beth walked through it, raising kids. I call it the eye of the storm. When I bump into a dad and he goes, yeah, my kids are 3, 5, 7, and 8. I go, whoo, baby, you are in the eye of the exhaustion storm. What do you say to a dad who that's where he is? And how did you walk through that with Beth? And also, what do you see in the main character or one of the main characters in the movie Ordinary Angels in that regard?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions here. I'll try to unpack as much as I can. First of all, in the movie Ordinary Angels, the storyline is Ed Schmidt, a guy from Louisville, Kentucky. His wife passes away at a young age. She has a degenerative liver condition. It's passed on to both of his daughters, and within a year or so of her passing, they're looking at a life-saving liver transplant being needed for the younger daughter at that time, Michelle. And so here's a man who's lost his love of his wife. By the way, he never married, even though that was 30 years ago, because he said, I never found anyone like my wife that could take her place. It's quite a story.
Wow.
But then on especially Valentine's week, when you think about love and all the conversations that we hear about it, but here was a man that when his wife passed away, poured into his kids and didn't turn away from his faith. Had some doubts, very skeptical. In the movie, does a great job of pointing this out, of just some of the anger or the questions that he had. And I think it's important for men to realize that, where it might be men or fathers who are listening to this right now, and at times they start to doubt God. Well, God's shoulders are big enough to handle that. But Ed does a great job of pouring into his kids, and constantly, whenever his daughter has an emergency situation, has to be taken to the hospital, instead of being in dire straits and frantic, his response was always to look at her and say, do you want to go on an adventure? And I love that, because fatherhood is an adventure. And every one of us at times feels overwhelmed, just like Ed did. Ours might not be life or death situations, but it seems like it in the moment when you have a teenager that you're fighting with who slams the door and says, I hate you. That's the moment when you feel overwhelmed, ill-equipped, inadequate in that role. And I always like to remind people that there's only been one perfect father. And
Kent Evans.
no.
No? I thought
Kent Evans. All right. I hate to burst your bubble, Kent. Wow. I'm in a serious moment, Lawson. I'm in a serious moment. And
I tried to warn you ahead of time.
With God.
Right.
Oh,
wow. He doesn't, he never learns.
Yeah.
Who doesn't?
Yeah.
Who doesn't?
I applaud the humor, poorly placed. You remember that humor is all about timing, Kent. Okay. Let's go back to school. Humor is about timing. When you're coming in for that powerful, emotional, godly moment, hey, it's me. I'm the perfect one. No.
I'm so sorry. We'll cut that out.
Let's run through it again. Okay. There was only one perfect father. and it's not Kent. All right.
Right. Right.
Uh, our Heavenly Father set the example for us. So when I think about parenting, God is more concerned with your direction than he is your perfection. And what we want to
Mm,
be doing is we want
I
to
love that.
keep moving in that direction that says, okay, Lord, I want to conform to your image. I want to be more like you. Well, what was God the Father like? Well, he frequently showed grace, he consistently shows discipline, and he unconditionally showed love.
Mm,
Those are the three things that
mm,
are a part of fatherhood. And so I think sometimes when we try to narrow it down and say, okay, if I were to concentrate on these three things, the discipline, the grace, and the love, if I were to do that as a father, how would it change how my children see me? And that
mm.
discipline piece is so important, especially in the early years. You know, 0 to 6 is prime time to really be pouring that discipline in lovingly, but establishing those boundaries so that they realize
Hmm.
these restrictions are here because we love you. The grace throughout, unconditional love, but it's built upon that foundation of discipline. So, yes, Ed in the movie does a great job of showing us that parenthood is an adventure, and all of us feel overwhelmed. I think it's a little more difficult for your single dads
Yeah.
because they don't get to have that united front, like
Hmm.
those who are
Sure.
married when you're on the same page. But I always
Yeah.
say the united front is so important in a marriage, and the kids seeing you together. Years ago, we used to do something at my wife, when I would come home from work, we would sit on a couch together and just talk for just 5 minutes. And the kids were jumping all around, and we'd say, "Hey, no, 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 this is our time. This is our time." And what we found over time was that, as crazy as it sounds, them seeing their mom and dad communicate
Yeah.
actually, it actually gave them an incredible sense of security.
Yeah. Right on.
I
Yep.
think of times when we would go on a date, and I'd be getting dressed up in one room, she'd be getting dressed up in the bathroom, because we only had one bathroom then. So we'd be going back and forth, and the kids would go back and forth. Where are you taking her? Oh, I'm taking her someplace nice. Oh, well, well. They run to the other room. He's taking you someplace nice. Oh, wow. Oh, it's not fast food this time. Good. So go back and forth. And finally, one of our girls would just look up at me and say, "Can I go with you? Can I go with you?" Because of the excitement. And I would look at her and I'd say, "I have a date with the most beautiful woman in all
Hmm.
the world, and you are not invited." And that might sound cold-hearted, but when that babysitter puts them to sleep that night and they lay in bed for a second, they're not going to have any problem sleeping. And here's why. They're going to fall asleep saying, "My mom loves my dad and my dad loves my mom." And that's
That's
a
right.
great feeling for a child to have when they fall asleep.
Mm, man.
Yeah, I think it's super important, like you said, for the kids to see the father prioritizing their mother above all things, above them as children.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you weaved that in. Hey, back to Ed. We've talked a lot on the podcast about not being a dad in solo, having some friends around you. Will you describe Ed and maybe kind of how he impacted other fathers, through what he went through? And um, I've seen enough of the movie to know that I don't want to give anything away. I don't want to steal from the movie, but pretty heroic effort by some people to help him take care of his daughter. And that sort of thing doesn't happen in a vacuum,
Yeah.
void of God's impact and hand on people. But also I'm just curious, what was Ed's relationships, foundation among the community?
Yeah. And Lawson, you bring up a great point, because one of the toughest things is for a guy to be willing to accept help.
Mm,
Uh, there's a really powerful scene where Hilary Swank, who plays Sharon Stevens, who is the crusader who goes on a mission to raise money to help defray the Schmidt family's medical bills, funeral bills, all of the different things that they have that's accumulated. There's a scene where Hillary is talking to Alan Ritchson, big reacher stud who plays Ed Schmidt, and they're at a skating rink with the kids, and he says to her, "Thank you for all you've done, but can I be honest with you?" And she says, "Sure, Ed, be honest with me." And he looks at her, and you think it's going to be this romantic moment, and instead he looks at her and he says, "I resent it. I resent it." And you're kind of punched in the gut as a viewer. And he said, all those things that you're doing, that's my responsibility as a father. I'm the one who's supposed to be protecting. I'm the one who's supposed to be providing. And there's this peek. Wow, I get emotional thinking about it. It's this peek into the heart of a man, of a father. And God put us on this role as the provider and the protector of our wife and our family. And here's a man who's shattered by the death of his wife, and now he's trying to hold it together and have some semblance of the fact of honor that he's helping to cover the bills that are now insurmountable in the hundreds of thousands of dollars back 30 years ago. And so he's just speaking honestly, and I think he's feeling overwhelmed. Kent, you talked about fathers feeling overwhelmed earlier. But there's this piece to where you have to let other people in. And he does that. And he allows a pastor, he allows a church, he allows a community, he allows Sharon to come alongside of him and to help out. And, that's at the heart of everything for fathers.
Dave, one thing I see dads looking for in our modern culture are things they can either take their family to or do with their family or expose their family to that would, drive home some good biblical principles or even create a fun night or whatever it might be. And I feel like dads feel like it's harder and harder sometimes to find these resources that I can feel safe putting my kids in front of or taking my family to. April and I were just about to watch a special the other night on a TV show, and we were like, "Hey, let's get the boys and watch this special." And then I said, "Hey, we might want to watch it first because I don't know what's going to happen on this thing." And so I feel like really cautious with a lot of resources out there. But things like you mentioned The Chosen. Our kids have seen all the episodes of The Chosen. Tell us about the movie Ordinary Angels. I think is a golden opportunity for a dad to take his family to something, whether he's going to catch it in theaters, if you catch this episode quick enough, or if you're listening 6 months down the road, go stream it. It seems to me like, because I've seen the movie, it's amazing. Ordinary Angels is a great film for you to take your family to. It will cause certain things to happen, but rather than me say what I think will happen, what are some advantages that a dad could take advantage of? What are some things that might happen if he takes his family to go see this film or he watches it on streaming? Encourage a dad to see it for the value it'll create for his family.
Yeah, I think it opens up a lot of doors of conversation and dialogue. It's intense. I always like to tell, if you have small children, a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old, it might take some explanation and helping them understand, okay, now here's what's happening here. But in the big scheme of things, with the way what people see, it's real life. It's the way things happened, and it shows us how people put God first and put one another first above themselves. And so there's so many teaching moments. I think I would go see that if I had a child or a teen, and I would say to them afterwards, I want to love you the way Ed loves his kids. How can I do that better? I would say a phrase like that. I would say, I want us to have more adventures together. And maybe it's something as simple as, saying I'm going to meet up you. We're going to, after school, you pick the place we're going to go, and we're going to go there. That's your place. And we do that once a month. Or I used to take my kids on a trip with me. If I had to go out of town, I didn't get too wrapped up, and we never set any records academically in the Stone family, but
Any good ones?
but we had a lot of great trips, and I promise you, they're not going to remember. They're not going to remember what happened in math class that day. But when Savannah was 11 years old, she's going to remember us driving through Illinois, and I let the sunroof back, and she got to be in charge of the music, and she played as loud as she could, and I let her stand up and put her hands up out the sunroof. And that's what she'll remember. She can't multiply now. Uh, but hey, she hasn't.
Dad, we want you to know that Dave's daughter was buckled in the whole entire time. Okay, she was buckled in.
She can't
Don't be
balance
afraid.
her checkbook, all right?
You're
But
right. She can't balance her checkbook.
she knows how to have fun.
Right.
So, but I think
I
so
know what
much
you mean now.
looking for those opportunities
Yeah.
and taking
Yeah.
something that might be mundane and turning it into something monumental. And it's going to vary based upon what the age is. Or I remember one time I was speaking in Phoenix, and my son was huge into baseball. And so I had it all set up with this administrative assistant at this church. As we're coming down I'd sent a picture to her of what Sam looked like. Sam was 11 at the time. We're coming down an escalator at the airport, and this woman says to him, "Do you like baseball?" And he says, "Yes, I love baseball. Well, I've got 2 tickets to the Arizona Diamondbacks game against the Cincinnati Reds tonight. Would you like to go?" He looks back at me. Then she says, "Randy Johnson is pitching." He looks back at me again. "Can we go? Can we go?" Well, I mean, she's got the tickets, and she picked you out of everybody coming down the escalator. I make it work. Whoa! So
Right.
you look
Wow.
for creating those memories and those experiences. Gosh, I did. This is a terrible trick I played on one time. Um, there was a kid that he had met in the Dominican Republic on a mission trip. And I pulled my next door neighbors into it. And so I I said to Beth, I said, "Let's mail that kid Ramirez. Let's send him some of your baseball cards, Sam." So we did, put him in a letter, said I got him mailed. And sure enough, we never mailed the letter. Waited about 3 weeks, haven't heard anything back from him. Well, I beat the letter up. I had it all, spilled stuff like it had been out in the elements. And then I had my next door neighbor come over. This is kind of terrible, but stick with me, Dad. Come over, knock the door, and I have Sam get it. And she's holding the envelope, and it's got stamps on it, and says, "Hey, I see your all's name on the return address here, and it looks like Sam's writing. I just wanted you to know that this letter must not have gotten sent." And so Sam looks at the letter, hands it back to me. It's filled with all the baseball cards and everything in it that he was trying to send to Ramirez. And he said, walks over to me, hands it to me, and says, "He never got it." And he starts crying. So now the next door neighbor is,
boy.
"You are a loser of a dad." Loser of a dad.
I'm
And
so interested to find out where this story goes. Like, how does this get redeemed?
so she's looking at me like, "You brought me into this, and now my next door neighbor, because I'm the bearer of bad news." And I said, "You know what, Sam, I'm so sorry he didn't get it. He's crying, He might have been 10 years old. I'm saying 11. He might have been 10, but he loved this kid." And I said, "You know what, son?" I said, "I got a better idea." I said, "What are you doing tomorrow?" He said, "What do you mean? What are you doing tomorrow?" "We're going to fly tomorrow, and we'll give them and we'll hand them to Ramirez tomorrow night."
Wow.
Okay.
Oh my
And all
goodness.
of a
I
sudden,
did not see that coming.
he went crazy. The next door neighbor is like, "Thank you, Lord." But so it was all orchestrated. My point is, Dad's put a little planning into these things, and it's amazing how you can create a memory for your kids that will last a lifetime. And yes, you can mail baseball cards, but I'd planned this trip with he and I, and lo and behold, it was on that trip we met Matt Reagan. And a year later, Matt Reagan was youth minister at Southeast.
Wow, that's amazing. I really didn't know where that story was going, and I was so curious how you were going to redeem
My
that.
next door neighbor.
That's fair. That's fair. Dave, I know we have limited time with you today, so I want to be conscious of your time. But there's a dad listening who I'm confident feels like he maybe hasn't done enough, or it's too far gone. You know, he's been a bad father long enough, and he feels like he can't double back. Um, Encourage that dad. What's a word you have for that dad? And then I want to remind while you're thinking of that, your answer, Dave, how would you encourage a dad who feels like he's just too far behind the eight ball to redeem and recover? And I want to remind dads, I thought the movie Ordinary Angels was tremendous. Go see it. I won't spoil it in case you don't know the story. You could Google it. Don't Google it. Go watch the movie. Being a guy who has lived in Louisville my entire life, Dave, thank you for leading Southeast so effectively as long as you did. And thank you for being a part of this Ordinary Angels story that indirectly impacted even my own actual family. So when I look at my church, I think, man, not only are we the church who likes to laugh a lot and has a joyous spirit, Southeast has been a church that has invested a lot in this community. And this story, Ordinary Angels, is about a really interesting time when God allowed Southeast to invest in the community in a very memorable way. So, Dad, go check out the movie Ordinary Angels. It's a great film. You will laugh, you will cry, and your family will be better off for having seen it. Dave, close us out with a word of encouragement to a dad listening who feels like, he either tried and failed, or he's just too far behind to ever catch up.
Yeah, and the word that I would choose is just honesty. My experience has been that kids respond when we swallow our pride and we're just honest when we tell them how we're really feeling. And there have been times when I've had to say to my kids, whether they were young kids or whether they were adult children, to say, "Hey, I blew it, or I didn't handle that right, or I want to be a better father. Will you give me a second chance?" And our kids, sons and daughters, are quick to forgive. Yes, I know there's sometimes there are painful circumstances and that might take some time, but just for them to know that that's your heart, that that's something that I want. I want to do better. I look back and I think, I didn't do the greatest job of my kids seeing me read God's word in front of them. I would be reading God's word, but I would be doing it when I was away at the office, or it wasn't in front of them as much. And so there's things that you wish you could go back and do differently, but in the big scheme of things, they'll understand when we're upfront with them and say, "Well, I'm going to try to do better in this area. Will you hold me accountable?" And my experience has been that kids have a gracious nature, and they want to see their dad succeed, and they want to have that good relationship and be in that right relationship. And if you're trying to take steps in that direction, that will speak volumes to them. Don't expect change overnight, but just for them to see that incremental change over time, that breathes life into them. And God can do some good things just through us being honest.
It gives them permission to be honest as well, and to be self-aware and come to you when they have an issue that they want to share, that they know they can do that openly because they've seen you do it to them.
Why would I want to expect my child to have a repentant heart or to ask for forgiveness if I haven't modeled that for them? And so there are times when we have to say, "Hey, Daddy didn't handle that right," or "I shouldn't have spoken to your mom that way. And I've
hmm
apologized to her, but I want to apologize to you too."
hmm
That's real life, but you're modeling for them what it's like for them to ask for forgiveness from their heavenly Father. And so you're teaching them how to do that.
Mm. Dave, thank you for taking some time. I know you're super busy and you're in the middle of kind of an interview season for the film. And thank you for shoehorning the Father on Purpose show into your schedule, because, bro, man, I've learned a ton from you as a dad. And more importantly, not just what you preached or films you've been behind or, big momentous occasions. I've watched you live it out as a dad who's
Yep.
walked through a lot of struggle. Um, even that time I gave you $5 at the post office that you wouldn't let me forget, and you gave me $5 back. I still feel like I owe you the $5 back, because you're just like, you live it out, man. You're a real guy. And I really appreciate you being that way, because my family's better off. My marriage is better off. My kids are better off because I've known you and sat under your teaching, but also just sat under your example.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, me too. Same for me. And Dave, you said the words self-deprecating. As you know, I love that Southeast. I've never heard that Southeast was known as the church where people laugh. And you know, you were a big part of that. The self-deprecating part is about being authentic. And I've just never known anyone to say anything about you that doesn't somehow tie back to Dave Stone. UC is the Dave Stone that there is. He's just who he is, genuine and authentic. And man, getting to spend this time today with you has brought back a lot of good memories. And thanks for what you did back then, and thanks a lot for your time today.
Well, thank you guys. It's been an honor for me, and I want you to know that I look up to you guys. I look up to the ministry that you all are sharing and performing, and I think this is in a culture where women are being told to stand up. I feel like dads and men are being told to sit down, and I think if we stand up in the correct way with the love of Christ, incredible things can happen. And so more power to you. Thanks for everything you guys are doing.
Dad, we hope today's been an encouragement to you, as it has been to me and to Lawson. Go check out the film Ordinary Angels. You might be catching this early enough to go catch it in theaters. Go do that. It helps a lot when we attend the theater show of a movie. It helps tell the world and tell the box office that matters, and we want more entertainment like that. If you're catching this after the fact, go stream it, download it, get it on DVD or a thumb drive or a CD-ROM. Somehow find your way to the film Ordinary Angels. It's a great watch. It'll be encouraging to you and your family. God bless you, and we'll see you again next week. Hey, Dad, thank you for listening to today's show. If you found this episode helpful, remember, you can get all the content and show notes at manhoodjourney.org/podcast. And if you really liked it, please consider doing 3 things. Number 1, share this podcast with someone. You can hit the share button in your app, wherever you listen to podcasts, or just call a person up and tell them to listen in. Number 2, subscribe to this podcast so you get episodes automatically. That helps us as well to help dads find the show. You can do that through your favorite listening app, whatever that is. And finally, review this podcast. Leave us a review, good or bad, wherever you listen. Those reviews also help other dads find the show. You can always learn more about what we're up to at manhoodjourney.org or fatheronpurpose.org. We will see you next week.